So before we get to the main part of why we're here, Sam wants to high-five me. We just want to really quickly sort of talk about this year's conference and sort of thank some people because we want to make sure we don't forget to do that. So, which by the way, if you look at the screen and you see the RUME 2020 scratched out with 2021, that was taken by Katie Taylor today when she went for a run or a walk or something, and she sent it to me. Thank you very much, Katie. That was a good addition. So, I'm going to sort of go through a bunch of people. If you can just sort of hold your applause till I get to the end of this slide, I would appreciate it. So, first of all, thanks to all of you. I realize that this has been a kind of a tough year in terms of, tough few years, but in terms of the conference planning and things have taken time in terms of making the decisions. I'm glad we are here. I'm glad we made the decisions we made. But thank you for your participation, your patience, and your understanding. That's been great. All the presenters, virtual and online, and all the reviewers, thank you very much. All volunteers, and thank you for buying them drinks. That we appreciate that. The program committee, definitely Ian and Tim from AV Technic. Tim is over there. Ian's over there. There you go. They were phenomenal. The Revere Hotel. This is the last time, well, for now, we're going to be here. But we've done this now 2 times across 3 years. And of course, Boston University, specifically Wheelock College of Education and Human Development, who are officially hosting us. So thank you very much. And it would be completely remiss of me not to thank this guy. So I'm sure all of you are very aware of all the work Sam's been doing the last few days. What you're not very aware of is how much work he's been doing for the last 3 years. And it's been amazing, and it's been amazing working with Sam. So thank you very much, Sam. Just a few quick numbers, as is tradition. We had 145 accepted papers, contributed preliminary and theoretical. We had 75 accepted posters, 152 author reviewers, without whom none of this would happen. We had 397 registered attendees, with 208 in person, 189 virtual. Out of that, we had 75 in-person and 63 virtual first-time attendees. I don't know for sure, but I am pretty sure that's a record by a large amount. Which is why I'm not doing this again. So yeah, in that terms, something that I said 2 years ago doesn't apply anymore because now this was the largest room yet. So with that, sort of to look ahead, I'm going to call Nikki up, our fearless leader.
So I guess when you're short, you have to adjust the microphone. Can't really see over that. It's okay. So current leadership, this team, this would not have happened, of course, without Shiv and Sam. Again, thank you. But also the rest of the exec committee, Estrella and Nick and BK. None of this happens without the exec committee. So thank you for your service. We greatly appreciate it. Which brings us to the incoming executive committee. You notice there's not a lot of change there. So thank you for your future and continued service. Karen, unfortunately, was unable to be with us this year, and unfortunately, she needs to step away from the roles for health reasons going forward. So the executive committee will be meeting and discussing a path forward, and so know that that will be coming in the near future. But again, thank you for your continued service. Which brings us to room 2324. So we know there have been communications about should we be adjacent to Math Fest. It's an ongoing conversation. No decisions have been made. We are still exploring options, figuring out what our continued partnership with the MAA looks like. But in the meantime, you may have heard rumors, Omaha, Nebraska next year. We hope you will join us. There is definitely the potential for snow again. But there's a lot to be said for being in the middle of the country. We also have an amazing zoo. We anticipate being right across the street from downtown, close to lots of great bars, restaurants, shopping, riverfront trails, lots of great things to do in Omaha. Talk to me if you want to know more. And with that, I will pass it off to Shiv.
Okay. The one last thing I will say is Sam asked me to sort of say that there's going to be like a grad student get-together, which is going to be in this room. So if you're a grad student, you want to hang out and sort of... Oh, 9 p.m. in this room? Okay, well, there you go. 9 p.m. in this room. If you're a grad student, want to hang out, come do that. Okay, so now to the main reason we're sort of here. And to do that, I'm going to call Keith up. Keith?
Thanks, Shiv, and thank you for taking this role for the last 2 years. It's been very difficult. You've been absolutely amazing at it. We were very lucky to have you. And also, thanks, Shiv and Sam, for arranging for this session for John. When we asked Annie if she would be supportive of this session, she said yes, but on one condition: it can't be sad. So the title is Celebrating John Selden, and we are going to celebrate. She means it sincerely, and I'm going to do my best to honor your wishes, Annie. I apologize if I break down. All right. I want to begin by saying a few words about John's research. And so when proof sort of became a thing in the mid to late 90s and the 2000s, the field had a very epistemological orientation to it. And what John did was provide an important counterweight. He really wanted to focus on the action, the phenomenology. What is it like to write a proof? What are we actually doing at the level of mechanism when we write a proof? How does it feel to write a reader proof? Now, these are impossible questions, and of course, John didn't answer them, but in his effort to answer them, he produced all these wonderful frameworks and theoretical constructs that have basically anchored the field as we know it today. I'll give you a few of John's greatest hits. If you're only going to read one of these papers, you should read the JRME paper. It's a great paper. It's been cited over 500 times, and it basically started 3 subfields of research. No small feat. The paper that I want to talk about, though, is actually the first paper, so the errors and misconceptions in college-level theorem proving. So this was a seminal paper that John and Annie wrote that, to my knowledge, was the first systematic empirical study of what university theorem proving was like. What I want you to notice is where it appeared. So this is a very major paper, and it was in the proceedings of the Second International Seminar on Misconceptions and Educational Strategies, and so on. And I want you to know 2 things. First, Annie Selden is so old or so experienced that she is so old that she was doing research when we could still use the word misconceptions. Second, and Annie, be honest here. I have to ask you, did this proceedings, did this seminar or conference actually take place? This is word salad. It looks made up.
That's where I met Jer Comfrey for the first time. She was at Cornell. It was done by Golan and Novak, who were really scientists.
So this is a real event and a real proceedings. There's a volume 3. I have my doubts, and I emailed Annie, and Annie wrote me back, and she goes, "Oh, no, this first appeared in a journal in 1974. I'm like, "Oh, what journal?" "The Bosphorus University Journal." And I'm like, "Annie, I got to be honest, I'm not sure that one exists either." But to make the serious point here, the work that John was doing was so novel that the poor guy had to make up fictitious outlets to publish it. And so one of the things that John told me was he had the next paper there, the Educational Studies and Mathematics paper. That's the for us people who are in the proof business. That's the proof framework paper. It's one of the 10 foundational papers in our field. He had to fight like hell to get that into ESM. He said the editor was giving him a really hard time and didn't think that this was in the scope of what they should publish. And so one of the things to consider is just how much the field has changed because of the work that John and, of course, Andy have put in to making proof an established discipline. So just as a point of comparison, this was an article that was published last year. And is there anything surprising about this? I don't think so. Proofreading is a popular topic. Paul Dawkins and Dove Zaskis do great work. Why wouldn't you publish a paper in JRME on that subject? But if this was 25 years ago, this just wouldn't have been done. It'd be in the Bosphorus University Journal, is that right? So it's one thing to think about when us college-level theorem-proving folks publish our articles or submit them in JRME and ESM and JMB, take them seriously. We do owe a debt to John and Annie for that, for us being allowed to have that. Of course, Annie.
So, John and I are mathematicians who are self-trained in math ed research. And that paper in Ed Studies was a special issue that Tommy Dreyfus was the editor, and we were invited. So we're mathematicians, and we're trying to write an education paper. And we get it back, and they say it has to be totally conceptually reformulated, rewritten. And we say, what the hell is that? We're mathematicians. There's, mathematics is written one way. But we learned and we did it.
I'll say you did, Annie. You certainly did. So there were, knowing John, there are 4 things that John loved. He loved thinking about mathematics, doing math, learning math, the experience of math. He loved talking to other people about mathematics and thinking about it and learning about it and doing it. John loved to travel, and John loved Annie Selden. The fact that he was able to spend the last 20 years of his life doing this regularly in a field that he helped create is one of the happiest stories I've ever heard. So when John is at a conference, you could see, when he was at this RUME conference, you could tell that there was no place that he'd rather be. He loved talking to everybody in the hall. He loved going to all the sessions. He loved giving talks. And what do you think John loved most about the RUME conference? What was he most famous for? Yeah, I think John was happiest when he was asking a question. You might say when John was asking a question, He never wanted that moment to end. But on a serious note, as I was thinking about it, I was really glad to go through this because it shows you just what a wonderful human beings that John and Annie are. So for you young folks who you might not get the inside joke that John would ask long questions at the end of all the talks, but from 2000 to 2015 or 2017 or so, John and Annie were an institution at these RUME conferences. So every proof talk, there would be John and Annie walking in early, and they were engaged. They were really engaged. You would never see them thumbing through the schedule to see what talk to go to next or looking at their phones. It didn't matter if you were a young researcher or a more established one. It didn't matter if your ideas were great or if your talk was terrible. They were engaged in the talk. They wanted to be engaged with you, and they wanted to make it better. And this is where the questions were coming from. And they had like two styles of questions. So Annie, well, Annie is a tough cookie. So what Annie was really good at is finding ambiguities and inconsistencies in the talk. So one of the things I would always hate when, for questions, I would see Annie kind of straighten up, her eyes would squint, then her hand would slowly raise. I'm like, oh boy. And of course, John's questions, he would start with something, and then he'd notice a connection to an experience that he had. He would tell you that, then he'd notice a connection to an experience that he had. Then he would notice a connection on those connections, and so forth. Usually when he was done, there was no question. It was just 5 minutes of talking. But there were always at least 3 good ideas that you had from those comments. There were often 23 good ideas that you had from those comments. And so the strategy that we all had for the questions is we would get the tough one for Annie, and then we go, well, John, what do you think? By the time he finished the question, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, it looks like I'm out of time, Annie. I want to move now to a video, a slideshow that Annie's daughter and John's stepdaughter made for him that they played at the memorial service. And here it is. John and Annie loved our community, and they really cared for it. One of the greatest gifts they gave us was the establishment of the Mathematical Association of America and John and Annie Selden Prize. So the Selden Prize they put a prize in to gain respectability and to help honor and advance the careers of people who have been doing good work. But in typical John and Annie's fashion, it wasn't a senior scholar or a lifetime achievement award. They put it so it was 10 years into your career so that you would have the chance to get more career opportunities and to get promotion to full professor. And you could see that we've honored some outstanding scholars. Paul Dawkins from Texas State, and we have now the tradition where they give the plenary talk, so we got that out of Paul, which was wonderful. We had Elise Lockwood at Oregon State, Juan Pablo Mejia Ramos at the University of Warwick. So I asked, so Annie's daughter also looked at the condolence letters that Annie got, and she wrote a wonderful poem about John's life. And I asked the most recent recipient of the prize, Paul Dawkins, if he would come and read it for us.
Behold the gentleman. I never saw him without a button-up shirt, often accompanied by a coat and tie, a linen handkerchief in case he or anyone else had need, and the belt buckle he designed from the gold fillings of teeth from relatives who had passed on. That was him, kind, thoughtful, proper, but not so proper he wasn't unique. You could say a rare breed, a mentor, and a monument. Just passionate enough to get in trouble, only caring for what was right. Honest, always, never disloyal. Kind of a paradox. A person with dyslexia who struggled with addition but proved great mathematical theorems. A man who loved children but never had any except for me, his stepdaughter, he raised as his own. A non-materialistic man who only bought the finest things when he did spend. He loved math and art and dogs and family. Most importantly, he is the man who loved my mother for 47 years. He was pretty firm on that. He was the yin to her yang, and their partnership was widely admired, inspiration for me and many. He didn't collect a kingdom. Instead, he gave himself away to others. Very few live with his humble class and dignity. If I ever knew a gentleman, it was him. He was a gentle man.
So what John is probably most known for, beyond the Selden Prize and beyond his research, is his mentorship. So John said that one of the high points, probably the moment he was most proud, was when he received the inaugural John and Annie Selden Mentorship Award in 2017. This was the last RUME conference that he attended. I was very honored that Milos invited me to award them with that, and it's because John and I literally owe my career to John and Annie. It was 2002. I was at a conference in Crete. And for some reason, John thought I had potential and should be at a research university. I was working at a teaching college in Kentucky at the time. So I gave my talk, and people came up and talked. They stood silently in the back. And then eventually, when the room filtered out, John and Annie came up to me, and they said that I had to get out of the teaching college and go to a research university. Annie, in her customary candor, said, "If you don't get out now and go to a research university, you will rot there." And so I said to them, I was considering doing that, but I don't know how. My alma mater was Carnegie Mellon, which is known for kind of information processing psychology, so people were pretty hostile to the university. There was no mainstream math educators there. Not the most social guy, didn't really have many connections. And so what Annie and John, who were living in Tennessee at the time, did was they said, we'll help you. So I went to their house and we spent a day working on the materials. I said, I don't have any letters of recommendation. They go, well, you can get your thesis advisor, we'll write you one, and then we'll pull some strings. I'll call Tommy Dreyfus, he'll write you one too. And so they did. And so about like, how do I apply? They put in a good word for me. They must have read countless teaching statements, cover letters. All in all, they probably put in about 40 hours of work. And it worked. I applied for 13 jobs. I took the Rutgers one right away, very early on, but I applied for 13 positions. I got 12 interviews. And one of the things that John did, he was telling me how to strategize and talk to mathematicians at conferences or over email, like how to engage mathematicians to hire a math educator. The joint meetings were coming up, and I said, John, is it really a good idea that I should be so kind of forward and proactive? I'm really weird. And then John gets that smile and the glint in his eyes when he gets excited. He goes, Keith, you are really weird, but if you publish 2 more papers, you'll become eccentric. So when I tell faculty members at Rutgers or in academia this story, people are astonished that Annie and John were so generous with their time. When I tell people at this conference, it doesn't surprise them at all. In fact, there's probably 10 or 20 people who have received a similar level of generosity from Annie and John. So they were truly special people. Well, Annie still is. And so one of the other their mentee was Milos Savic. Milos is here, but for the smoothness of the presentation, he is going to give a video where he shares his thoughts on John.
Hi, my name is Dr. Milos Savic. I'm a professor at the University of Oklahoma, and I'd like to say a couple words about my co-advisor, Dr. John Selden. I want to paint a picture for you all by describing that we were in the 3rd floor in Walden Hall at the New Mexico State University. I'm sitting at a chair next to the entrance of John and Annie's office. Of course, at the time it was doctors Selden and Selden, and this was our weekly or biweekly visit about my dissertation progress. Annie was sitting at the computer looking up a paper that John could not quite name, but could describe what he perceived was an important aspect of it. He had his eyes closed and he paused his speech to frame what he wanted to say next. He took his time connecting what the topic we were talking about and another topic that he felt connected together. In that moment, I was totally focused on John's next words. John's connection making was not restricted to my dissertation. I claim that he literally changed my life. In New Mexico State, that was my 2nd attempt at a graduate school. When being advised by faculty before my 1st semester there, they looked at my grades and my struggles and asked me about taking a course called Understanding and Constructing Proofs. Sure, I said. The course was taught in a conference room. There were 3 of us and the instructor on record, Dr. John Selden. We came out to find out that later that Annie was not doing well. So John taught the whole course by himself that semester. I had never had a course like this. We got a set of notes without any proofs, and we're asked to try to prove them using those notes. No lecture, no correctness on first attempts at assignments. What is this special way of writing my hypotheses, skipping a whole bunch of space, writing the conclusion and unpacking the conclusion? The 3 students in that class, including myself, took turns trying to prove these theorems and writing them on the board. I was always worried about my grade during the semester, and early on I was not doing well. But after about 2 months, something clicked. It was an existence proof of the Selden's proof frameworks, because I was now taking their notes and either proving or seeing how others proved the theorems. Throughout my difficulties, John was so patient in that course, and he would always pause when we, the students, were explaining our work. He would just sit there and look at our work, not making a sound. In those moments, I was totally focused on John's next words. I went in to pass my quals, and I was at the stage of choosing an advisor. I really enjoyed algebra, so I thought about doing a dissertation on algebraic number theory. I also like math education, so I asked the Seldens if they could advise me. Immediately, they included me on a data collection of their own course. In my first semester, I was asked by them to write an abstract for a RUME proposal. It was awful, and Annie told me as much. And in those situations, John was always supportive and encouraging. The Seldens invited me to my first RUME conference and tried to introduce me to as many RUME scholars as they could. I can remember Annie and John having me practice my presentations for job interviews or conferences in a large lecture hall. I received my first job offer, and I could tell they were proud. Those first few years after my dissertation, I often called or emailed them for advice. Much of my communication was with Annie, but I could always hear John in the background making sure Annie mentioned one of his thoughts. I had multiple emails that were written by Annie that included the phrase, "John says." Annie and John lived RUME research. John would drive while Annie would read a paper out loud so they could enjoy it together. They took walks while discussing research. And now I teach every proof-based course using the Selden's proof frameworks. And I specifically teach my discrete math course using a modified version of their notes. The same notes that I learned from John many years ago. I try my best to emulate John's care, patience, and thoughtfulness in every one of my courses. When I pause in my class, hopefully my students are totally focused on my next words. Thank you, John. Next, we will have a few short messages from members of our community. Each message will share who the person is, where they currently are, and what was their first RUME conference. Enjoy.
John Selden was a gentle giant, a deep thinker, a kind person, and the yang to Annie's yin. All of our lives have been enriched having had John as a colleague and a friend.
As it says in the Baha'i writings, perpetuate his existence in thine exalted rose garden, that he may plunge into the sea of light in the world of mysteries.
Something I've always noticed is they're always looking out for each other in little ways. A couple of rooms ago, I was sitting, waiting for a workshop to start, and John was looking all over for a Diet Coke for Annie. And the only place we could find one when I helped him look was in the hotel gym in a little cooler.
John and Annie came to the very first talk that I gave that tried to use data to talk about teaching. And they gave me useful feedback. It made me feel welcome. And so they're part of the reason I'm here. Thank you so much.
Hey, John. I think it's safe to say that I wouldn't be here and many of us wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. And I love it here. So thank you.
At the joint meetings one time, after I'd given a talk that I was sure had bombed, John came over to me and shared some very kind and encouraging words that I haven't forgotten to this day. So thank you, John, for setting such a good example for all of us.
John and Annie Selden came to my very first talk as a graduate student and took my work seriously. I don't remember the questions they asked, but I do remember the feeling of pride that real researchers were asking me real questions and I had real answers. Thanks for everything, John.
John Selden is the closest thing RUME has to a celebrity, and that comes complete with his Selden selfies. However, it's the way he spent time engaging with all of us in our research, even when we were naive grad students, that makes his impact on the field immeasurable.
John, thank you for coming to talks, especially talks of new researchers, and always having the question. It was always a relief to see you in the audience and know, whether it was my talk or someone else's talk, that at the end there would be at least one really good and often hard question. I'll really miss seeing you and Annie walking around conferences with your hats together. We'll miss you.
Hello, I'm Paul Dawkins. I want to say thank you to John Selden and to Annie Selden for always being such an embodiment of the very warm and welcoming spirit that I've always experienced in the RUME community. I'm so thankful for you. I'm thankful for the ways that you cared for young scholars and the ways that you represented lifelong learning, and you had such a cool retirement of just continuing to work, continuing to learn, continuing to do research, continuing to teach. It's just such a cool thing, and I really appreciate your presence. Especially, I'll always remember and be thankful to John for kindly making me aware that the first letter and the first word and the first title of the first paper that I ever put out at a conference had a typo in it. And I'm really, I treasure that memory in a way, and I'm thankful for all the things that John and Annie taught me.
Hi, I'm Tim Fukawa Conley. John and Annie's work has been foundational to the field of undergraduate math education. It opened the door for people like me to do the kind of research that we love, and their work has formed central constructs in many of my papers, and it's the reason that I continue to work in the field today. We wouldn't be where we are without John.
So my first memory of John is coming into a RUME meeting. And when I came into the RUME meeting, he was sitting in the second to the back, or second to the front seat on the end, waiting patiently for the talk. And he was there many, many times. And I was so impressed with how much he cared about being there. And I've heard this story about him. He's there to listen, and he was there to listen and be thoughtful and provide feedback every single time almost that I talked. And I appreciated having him there because I knew that he cared about our work, our research, and about supporting those of us who are in there. I have one other thought about this, which is that for me, one reason that I really appreciated Dr. Selden was that he was a connection between mathematics and mathematics education. And we know that we kind of live in the intersection of the both, and he is a perfect example of a professor that did that in supporting his graduate students and coming to the meetings and in all the publications he did. So we miss you, John. Thanks.
One of my favorite things about John is how he always made a connection between any research talk that he went to and events in his own classroom. So if you were there with him, you always got treated to both a fun story and a reminder of the purpose of our work.
John Selden. Tweed jacket, slightly mischievous smile. He might throw you a curveball at the end of your talk, but he was dedicated to RUME, to all of us. We'll miss him.
John was my favorite person for philosophical discussions. The hours we spent exploring zombie consciousness are among some of my favorite memories. I'm grateful to John in those conversations for lessons in thinking and considering ideas of other people. I knew I was going to learn something whenever John smiled and looked down and shook his head a little and cupped his hand and said, "Now, I wouldn't say whatever I had just said." And then there would be a long pause, and then wisdom would follow. I love that about John, and I miss it heartily.
Okay, I'm going to offer a few concluding thoughts. And Rena Zaskis once told me that you could tell a lot about the research community and its integrity by how it treats the scholars that helped create it. And I want to thank a lot of people who made this celebration possible. So Shandy Hawk and also console Annie after John's passing. And Shandy Hawk has just been absolutely amazing at making arrangements of all types. Milos helped me put together this presentation. He's having a lot of other work, life work, and he put this aside to make this work. I sent Elise an email saying, would you be willing to have Milos publish an in memoriam to IDRUM? The editors wrote back within half an hour and said, yes, we will absolutely do that. As soon as you can write it, we'll publish it. I didn't have to ask Shiv or Sam to do this event. They contacted me right away. And everybody that of course, you all helped for everybody who sent in the videos as well. And everybody that I've talked to said that this was nothing, because they said, well, this is obviously the right thing to do. But just because something's the right thing to do doesn't mean that it always gets done. This is a really special community, and I think we're at our best when we realize that our research is not a zero-sum game, that we're all in this together and it's RUME as a unit, and I was really proud of how everybody stepped up to make this possible. All right, Annie, I'm going to apologize in advance, and this isn't a bad thing. I know that you said that this is supposed to be a celebration and not sad. I'm probably going to break down here. I did when I was rehearsing this. So John told Annie that he wanted her to continue doing mathematics education research for the simple reason that she was good at it. And John is absolutely right. Among Annie's many skills, one thing that she is probably the best at is seeing the big picture and how all the different proof talks relate to each other. Annie has the unique ability to, when she summarizes a paper, I often feel that she understands the paper better than the author who wrote it. Well, I don't know how that's possible to even have as a skill, but Annie has it. And I'm so happy that Annie came to this conference and she enjoyed herself and she participated. I was really happy to see Annie giving my old colleague and friend Laura Alcock a hard time in her talk. Yeah, it's good to see that Annie still has her fastball with the questions. And Annie, I'm going to speak, which I presume for the community, that we missed you and we loved you and we're so happy to have you back. Thank you. And so I was talking with Milos about what we think the best way to properly honor John is, and we've decided to edit a book. And so I've spoken with Jin Fakai. He gave us informal approval for this. And what we are going to do is try to have new directions that built upon the four areas of research that John and Annie have helped created with college-level theorem proving. And so some of you are going to be getting emails from me, Milos, and myself in the next week inviting you to write a chapter. Now, you sort of have to say yes now, right? And I think the way that we really can honor Annie is to put her to work at what she does best. So Annie, if you are willing, I don't want to presume, first, we would like you to write the final chapter of the book about how proof in university level theorem proving has developed and emerged over the last 30 years and where we're going, a retrospective, if you're willing. It was Tim's paper. Tim, I think Annie's not writing the paper. Will you do it for me? The other thing is in Jinfa's book series, what they put a premium on is mentorship. They want graduate students and younger scholars to write chapters and to receive feedback from other more senior and experienced scholars in the field. I think we can all agree that there would be nobody better than Annie Selden. So if you would be willing to help some of the younger scholars with their chapters, we would appreciate that as well. And anyway, thank you, and John Selden, a life well lived.
Thank you, Keith. Okay, here we are. That is the end of RUME 2020 and 2022. Well, it's the end of 2022, I suppose. I think I'm afforded a mistake here. Thank you very much to everybody for what they have done. And this concludes our activities for this year. Join us in Omaha next year and have fun.